When we reflect on the words of Heraclitus, "You can't step in the same river twice," we are confronted with a truth that is both simple and profound. Life moves, time flows, and nothing remains exactly as it was before. The river is never still. The water you touch once flows downstream and is gone forever, replaced by new currents. This is not just poetry, it is the reality of our existence. No moment can be repeated, no experience can be lived exactly the same way twice, and no matter how much we wish to cling to yesterday, the current of life carries us forward. The flow of time is unstoppable, and in that truth lies both a challenge and an opportunity. Think of the ancient civilizations whose names still echo in history. The great city of Babylon once stood as a wonder of the world, adorned with towering walls and magnificent hanging gardens. Its rivers ran through its heart, nourishing a people who believed their power would last forever. But Babylon, like the river, changed. The mighty walls fell, the once thriving empire was overtaken, and the glory of yesterday became the lessons of tomorrow. Time moved forward, and Babylon was carried into history's current. The lesson we inherit from them is that nothing, no matter how great or powerful, is exempt from the movement of time. Change sweeps through every empire, every life, and every soul. This truth is not confined to empires and kings, but touches each of us in our personal lives. The child you once were no longer exists, though they still live inside your memory. The person you were 5 years ago, even last year, is not the same person standing here today. Your thoughts, your beliefs, your body, your spirit, they all have been shaped by the currents of time. You cannot step back into who you once were, just as you cannot step into the same waters twice. This is not a loss, it is the nature of growth. To resist it is to deny the very rhythm of existence. Ancient philosophers understood this truth deeply. Heraclitus himself observed the world not as static but as dynamic, a place where fire and motion ruled all. He saw that everything was in flux: the seasons, the skies, the growth of plants, the lives of men. For him, stability was an illusion, and those who clung to it were like someone clutching at mist. It would always slip through their fingers. Instead, he urged humanity to open their eyes to the flow, to accept the ceaseless transformation of life. Consider the story of the Roman Republic, a nation that began as a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River. The Romans were not born as conquerors of the world. They became so by recognizing that the flow of time demanded evolution. Their political system shifted, their armies adapted, their culture absorbed the knowledge of Greece, Egypt, and Persia. Had they resisted change, they would have remained a small community, forgotten by history. But by moving with the river of time rather than against it, they grew into one of the greatest civilizations ever known. This lesson stretches beyond the history books. It applies to the lives we live today. Think of your own river. Every opportunity that passes, every conversation that ends, every season that closes its doors, becomes part of yesterday's current. You cannot retrieve it, no matter how tightly you try to hold on. But here is the beauty: just as the waters behind you cannot be recovered, the waters ahead bring fresh chances, new moments, and undiscovered paths. Every bend of the river offers something new if you have the courage to step forward. In ancient Arabia, the desert people, the Bedouins, understood this deeply. They did not fight against the desert winds or try to trap the shifting sands. They moved with the flow of the seasons, following water, following stars, allowing time and nature to guide their survival. Their strength lay not in forcing life into their will, but in flowing with it, learning to see opportunity where others saw only harshness. They remind us that wisdom is not in resistance but in movement, in flowing as the river flows. It is natural to fear change, to cling to the shores of certainty. We hold on to old identities, old roles, old ways of being, hoping the river will stay still for our comfort. But it never does. Just as no river can stop flowing, no life can remain unchanged. To deny this is to invite frustration and despair, yet to accept it, to embrace the truth that the waters always move, is to unlock peace and power. The ancients knew this. The rise and fall of kingdoms were not just tragedies. They were transformations that birthed new ages, new leaders, new ideas. The city of Athens offers another example. When the Persians burned it to the ground, its people could have surrendered to despair, mourning what was lost. But instead, they rebuilt, not the same Athens, but a greater one. From its ashes rose the Athens of Pericles, of Socrates, of Plato, of democracy and philosophy. The river had swept away the old, but in its place came the new, richer and more powerful than before. Such is the way of time. It takes, but it also gives. It ends, but it also begins. And so we stand each of us in our own river. The water that passes by today will never return. The conversations, the opportunities, even the struggles, they flow downstream, never to be touched again. This can fill us with sadness, but it can also fill us with hope. For just as we cannot step in yesterday's water, we are gifted with today's, fresh and alive. Tomorrow will bring new waters, new chances, new journeys. The flow is unstoppable, but within it lies the invitation to grow, to adapt, to become. History tells us again and again that those who fought against time were crushed, while those who flowed with it found greatness. Pharaohs who resisted change were overthrown, empires that clung to old systems collapsed. Yet leaders who embraced the flow, like Alexander who marched into unknown lands, reshaped the world forever. Their courage to move with the river, rather than against it, gave birth to legacies we still remember today. And so, the flow of time calls to us not as an enemy, but as a guide. To recognize its unstoppable nature is to free ourselves from the chains of the past and the fear of the future. It is to step into the river with open eyes, knowing that while the waters may change, we too can change with them, becoming stronger, wiser, and more alive with each passing moment. And just as the river never stops, neither does our opportunity to adapt, to renew, and to embrace what comes next, because adaptability is where true strength is found. In the long journey of human history, survival has never belonged to the strongest alone, but to those who can adapt. Time has proven this truth over and over again. A mighty beast may fall, a powerful empire may crumble, but those who learn to bend without breaking, to adjust when the winds change, are the ones who endure. Adaptability is strength, not weakness. It is the ability to live in harmony with the constant flow of life, to see change not as an enemy, but as a teacher. The river of life is unstoppable, and those who learn to swim with its current, instead of fighting against it, discover resilience, growth, and even greatness. Consider the ancient Bedouin tribes who wandered across the vast deserts of Arabia. Life in the desert was unforgiving, with scorching heat by day and freezing winds at night. Water was scarce, food was uncertain, and storms could transform the land overnight. Yet the Bedouins did not curse the desert or demand it change for their comfort. They moved with it. When the rains came, they followed the grazing lands. When the stars shifted in the night sky, they used them as guides for their caravans. They learned to live lightly, ready to move their tents at a moment's notice. Their adaptability was not only survival, it became their strength, shaping a culture of resilience, hospitality, and wisdom that carried them through centuries. This lesson is not confined to the deserts. Across history, every people who embraced adaptability rose, while those who clung stubbornly to the past faded away. Take the story of the ancient Israelites wandering the wilderness. For 40 years, they had to adapt to constant change, to shifting conditions, to new challenges. They ate manna that appeared fresh each day, never storing, never clinging to yesterday's provision. Their survival depended on flexibility and faith. Had they tried to live by the rigid patterns of Egypt, they would have perished in the sands. Instead, they became a people forged by adaptability, prepared to enter a promised land that required them to be strong in spirit and open to transformation. In another part of the world, consider the story of the Phoenicians. They did not build vast armies like Egypt or Mesopotamia, nor did they dominate with sheer force. Instead, they became seafarers, adapting to the unpredictable nature of the sea. Their ships carried them beyond the Mediterranean, and they created trade routes that connected cultures far apart. The Phoenicians embraced the uncertainty of the waters, learned to ride the winds, and adjusted their methods to every port they entered. Because of their adaptability, they influenced language, commerce, and exploration far beyond what their small homeland could have achieved by power alone. The same principle applies in the life of every individual. The world around us changes daily, new technologies, new ideas, new opportunities, new challenges. If we insist that the world must remain as it was yesterday, we condemn ourselves to frustration. But when we adjust, when we learn, when we embrace what is new, we unlock the doors to growth. Adaptability is not about abandoning who we are, but about expanding who we can become. Just as a tree bends in the wind so it does not snap, so too must we bend in the winds of change. In ancient Greece, the Athenians understood this after their city was destroyed. They could have lived in the ruins, mourning what was gone, but instead they adapted to the new reality. They rebuilt, not the same Athens, but a greater one. They took lessons from their enemies, strengthened their defenses, and turned their focus to arts, philosophy, and democracy. Out of their adaptability emerged the golden age of Athens, a beacon of wisdom and culture that continues to inspire the world. Their willingness to adapt turned tragedy into triumph. But adaptability is not always about survival alone, it is also about innovation. Think of Alexander the Great. His genius was not just in battle but in his ability to adapt to the cultures he conquered. Instead of forcing Greek ways onto every land, he blended traditions. In Persia, he adopted elements of their dress and customs. In Egypt, he honored their gods. He understood that to rule a vast and diverse empire, he had to adapt, not impose. This flexibility allowed his empire to expand farther than any before him, and though his life was short, his legacy endured for centuries. Even in nature, we see this truth written clearly. The creatures that survive are not always the strongest or the fastest, but the ones that adapt to their environment. In the frozen lands of the north, animals grow thick coats to endure the cold. In the deserts, they store water and move at night. Life itself is a testament to the power of adaptability. Human beings, too, spread across the earth not because they were the strongest animals, but because they could adjust, learning to fish in rivers, to farm in valleys, to build shelter in forests, to sail across oceans. Our entire history is a story of adaptability being the foundation of strength. We all face moments when life shifts beneath us. A career changes, a relationship ends, health falters, or circumstances beyond our control reshape our path. In those moments, we can choose to resist, clinging to what no longer is, or we can adapt, stepping into the new waters with courage. History shows us that the second choice is the one that leads to survival and eventually to greatness. The Israelites adapted to the wilderness, the Bedouins adapted to the desert, the Phoenicians adapted to the sea, the Athenians adapted to destruction, and each of them found strength in what seemed like weakness. It is easy to see adaptability as compromise, as if bending to change makes us weak. But in truth, it is the opposite. Rigidity is brittle, it breaks under pressure. Adaptability is flexible, it absorbs the shock, adjusts, and continues. The oak tree that refuses to bend in the storm may be uprooted, while the reed that sways survives to grow again. The wisdom of the ancients teaches us that those who adapt endure, and those who endure shape the future. Life, like the river, never stands still. The current brings challenges and opportunities, sometimes carrying us to places we never expected. But the ones who rise are those who understand that adaptability is not surrender, it is power. To adjust is not to lose yourself, it is to become more resilient, more resourceful, more capable. And just as time never stops flowing, the need for adaptability never ceases, for with every new wave of change comes the chance to renew ourselves, to grow stronger, and to step boldly into what comes next. Because renewal always follows change. When we look at the long arc of history, we see that renewal is never born out of comfort or permanence. Renewal always comes through change, the kind of change that feels disruptive, painful, or even destructive at first. Yet what seems like an ending is very often the seed of a new beginning. The river never flows backward, and every time it sweeps away the old, it brings fresh waters, carrying within them the possibility of life, of growth, of transformation. Renewal does not come by clinging to what has already passed. It comes when we step into the new, when we trust that what is unfolding carries within it the promise of becoming. Take, for example, the story of Athens during the Persian Wars. When the Persians advanced and set the city aflame, the Athenians could have seen only devastation. Their temples were destroyed, their homes reduced to ashes, their familiar streets vanished in smoke. But out of that loss came one of the greatest renewals the world has ever witnessed. They rebuilt their city with greater strength and vision. They constructed the Parthenon, a marvel of architecture that still stands as a symbol of human ingenuity. They nurtured philosophy, art, and democracy, shaping a golden age that continues to inspire humanity thousands of years later. What seemed like destruction was actually preparation for rebirth. Renewal came not in spite of change, but because of it. This same truth appears in countless other ancient stories. Consider the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. For the people of Israel, it was an unspeakable tragedy. Their temple was torn down, their city burned, their people carried into exile. Yet in exile, they were renewed. They rediscovered their identity, preserved their faith, and wrote down sacred texts that would guide not only their people, but millions across the world for centuries to come. The pain of displacement gave birth to a spiritual resilience that no destruction could ever erase. Renewal often hides within the very things that first appear as loss. Nature itself teaches this lesson again and again. The seasons move in cycles of death and rebirth. Winter strips the trees bare, covering the land in silence. But within that silence lies the preparation for spring. Flowers bloom, rivers swell, fields come alive, all because of the change that preceded them. The ancients understood this rhythm deeply. Farmers of Mesopotamia watched the flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers wash away the old and leave behind fertile soil, ready for new harvests. They did not resist the flood, they welcomed it, for they knew it was the path to renewal. The change that seemed destructive was the very reason life could continue. Even empires that fell left behind seeds of renewal. The fall of the Egyptian Old Kingdom gave rise to new dynasties, fresh art, and innovative architecture. When Rome collapsed centuries later, it seemed like the end of civilization itself, yet out of that collapse came renewal in new forms. Nations rising, cultures blending, new systems emerging. History reminds us again and again no fall is final, no ending is absolute. In the constant current of time, every ending carries within it a beginning. Every loss conceals an opportunity for renewal. On a personal level, renewal often enters our lives in the same way. A career ends and it feels like failure, yet that loss clears the way for a new path we never would have dared to take. A relationship breaks, and it feels like despair, yet in that breaking, we discover our own strength and the chance for love that is deeper and truer. Even illness, hardship, or struggle can become the soil of renewal, teaching us resilience, empathy, and wisdom that comfort never could have given. Change forces us out of the familiar, but it also forces us into growth. Without change there can be no renewal. In the ancient world, renewal was often linked to fire. Fired, but it also purified. Temples were rebuilt with greater splendor after being burned. Scrolls were recopied with greater care after being lost. Cities rose stronger from their ashes. The Greeks honored the myth of the phoenix, a bird that burned in flames only to rise again from its ashes, more radiant and powerful than before. This myth was not just a story. It was a reflection of the truth that renewal requires change, that something must end for something greater to begin. The story of the Israelites in the wilderness is another example. Their exodus from Egypt was not easy. It was a tearing away from everything they knew. They faced hunger, thirst, and uncertainty. Yet it was in that wilderness, in that space of constant change, that they were renewed as a people. They received laws, built community, and prepared themselves for the promise ahead. Without the disruption of leaving Egypt, they could not have been transformed. Renewal demanded the breaking of chains and the stepping into something new, even when the way forward was unclear. We too must learn to see change as the path to renewal rather than an obstacle to it. It is tempting to cling to what feels safe, to resist the shifting currents, but safety often breeds stagnation. Renewal requires us to let go, to surrender to the flow, to trust that even when the old is swept away, the new that comes will carry life. It does not mean the process is painless. Far from it. The Athenians wept as their city burned, the Israelites mourned as they wandered, the exiled Jews longed for home. Pain is real, loss is real, but within them lies the seed of transformation. The greatest leaders of history understood this truth. Alexander the Great did not simply conquer, he renewed. Every land he entered changed him, and he, in turn, blended cultures, creating a new world that was not purely Greek, not purely Persian, not purely Egyptian, but a fusion of them all. His adaptability was tied to renewal, showing that embracing change is not only survival, but the gateway to creating something entirely new. Renewal is not just about enduring change, but about using it to rise higher. In our lives, Every river we step into is different from the last. The waters sweep away what was, but they also bring what will be. Renewal is hidden in every current, waiting for those willing to let go of the banks and step forward. The ancients left us this wisdom not in words alone, but in the living stories of their struggles and triumphs. They remind us that what feels like the end may actually be the beginning, that destruction may conceal creation, and that change, though unstoppable, is never without purpose. Renewal is not separate from change, it is born from it, and it carries us into the next stage of our journey, where holding on blocks growth, and letting go makes space for transformation. One of the greatest obstacles to human progress has always been the tendency to hold on to what no longer serves us. It is natural, we are creatures of habit, creatures of memory, creatures who find comfort in what is familiar. Yet holding on, while it feels safe, can also become the very thing that keeps us from growing. When we cling too tightly to the past, to old ways, to outdated beliefs, or to fading certainties, we block the path of transformation that is waiting ahead. Just as a river must keep moving to remain alive, so too must we release what is behind us if we wish to reach what lies before us. History gives us countless reminders of this truth. Think of the pharaohs of Egypt during the time of Moses. The story is not only a tale of oppression, but also a lesson in the danger of stubbornness. The pharaoh refused to let go, refused to release the Israelites, refused to adapt to what was clearly unfolding. His grip on power was so rigid that it became his undoing. Had he recognized the flow of change, history might have remembered him differently. Instead, his refusal to let go left Egypt devastated. Holding on too tightly does not preserve strength, it destroys it. The same is true of empires. Rome, once a mighty power, began to crumble not only because of enemies at its gates, but because of its unwillingness to adapt. Its clinging to systems that no longer worked, corruption was overlooked, traditions were held rigidly while the world around them shifted, and the empire fractured under the weight of its own stubbornness. By trying to preserve what was no longer sustainable, Rome blocked its own renewal and hastened its fall. Holding on often feels like security, but in reality, it is stagnation. On a more personal level, think of how many lives have been held back by the refusal to let go. A man clings to a past failure, replaying it in his mind until he convinces himself he is unworthy of success. A woman holds on to a relationship that has long since ceased to nurture her, fearing the unknown more than she values her own growth. A student clings to an old dream that no longer inspires them, afraid to admit that their path has changed. In each case, the act of holding on feels like loyalty or stability, but in truth, it closes the door to new opportunities. The river continues to flow, yet they stand on the bank, grasping at waters already gone. The ancients often expressed this wisdom in parables and myths. The Greek story of King Midas, who clung to his love of gold even when it cursed him, is one such reminder. His inability to release his obsession brought him misery. Or think of Lot's wife in the story told in the scriptures, who looked back at the city of Sodom, unable to let go of what was behind, and was turned into a pillar of salt. These stories endure not simply as religious or cultural tales, but as timeless mirrors of our own human tendency to look backward, to hold on, and to lose ourselves in the process. To grow, we must release. The Israelites who left Egypt could not have become a new people if they had insisted on carrying Egypt within them. They struggled often with the temptation to return to the old ways, to go back to the food and security of slavery rather than step into the uncertainty of freedom. Every time they looked back, they delayed their progress. But every time they let go and trusted the journey, they moved closer to their destiny. The lesson is clear: growth demands release, and letting go is the price of transformation. In the world of nature, this principle is unavoidable. A snake must shed its skin to continue growing. If it resists, it dies. Trees must release their leaves in autumn to survive the winter and be ready for spring. Rivers must release water to the sea to make room for new rains. Nature itself is a constant cycle of letting go so that renewal can happen. Only humans resist, clutching what is gone, believing that by holding tighter we can preserve what cannot be preserved. Yet the natural order shows us again and again life comes through release, and growth begins where holding on ends. Think of Alexander the Great once more. He could have clung to Macedonia, ruling only his father's kingdom, content with a small piece of the world. Instead, he let go of the security of the familiar and embraced the uncertainty of conquest. By releasing what was small, he stepped into what was vast. His willingness to let go of safety created a legacy that reshaped continents. Greatness requires the courage to release. Even in intellectual life, the same rule applies. Socrates, the teacher of Athens, urged his students to let go of the illusion of knowing. He taught that wisdom begins when we admit we know nothing. By releasing pride and certainty, the mind becomes open to true learning. Clinging to false knowledge blocks growth, while humility clears the way for understanding. To hold on to ignorance disguised as wisdom is to remain stagnant. To let go is to evolve. When we hold on too tightly, we often do not realize that we are blocking the very blessings we hope to receive. The farmer who hoards last year's seeds, refusing to plant them, will never see a new harvest. The traveler who refuses to release their baggage cannot climb the mountain. The student who clings to old lessons cannot receive new ones. Growth requires space, and space requires release. Letting go is not abandonment, it is preparation. The ancients who built, rebuilt, and transformed their worlds understood this well. The Athenians, after their city burned, did not hold on to the ashes. They cleared them away and built anew. The Phoenicians, when one trade route closed, sought another. The Bedouins, when one water source dried, moved on to find another. Each act of release created room for resilience, for strength, for transformation. And so we are reminded that holding on is often the greatest enemy of growth. It can feel safe, it can feel loyal, it can feel like strength, but in truth, it is fear. True strength lies in the courage to let go, to trust that what lies ahead is greater than what lies behind, to believe that the river's flow always carries renewal, even if it first feels like loss. When we release the past, we open our hands to the future. When we let go of what no longer serves us, we create space for what will. Growth waits for no one, but it welcomes those who are willing to embrace it. And embracing growth means embracing change, for it is only through change that greatness is born. Embracing change has always been the path of those who dared to become great. It is the defining trait of leaders, thinkers, and civilizations that rose above the ordinary. Change unsettles, it challenges, it strips away what is familiar, but within it lies the seed of greatness that cannot be found anywhere else. Those who resist change remain trapped in the comforts of what they already know. But those who embrace it step into the unknown and discover strength, wisdom, and opportunities that would never have revealed themselves otherwise. To embrace change is to align with the river of time itself, to recognize that greatness does not come from clinging to the banks, but from letting the current carry you forward into new horizons. History is filled with examples of this truth. Consider Alexander the Great, a young man who could have remained a king of Macedonia, content with a small throne. Instead, he embraced the uncertainty of venturing beyond what was known. He marched into Persia, into Egypt, into lands his people had never seen. With each step, he faced change, new cultures, new climates, new challenges, and with each step he adapted and grew. He did not fear the unfamiliar, he welcomed it, often adopting the customs of those he conquered and blending them with his own. His greatness was not just in his conquests, but in his embrace of the unknown. In his willingness to change alongside the world he was reshaping. He became more than a king, he became a legend, precisely because he did not cling to the comfort of the familiar. This principle echoes in the story of Abraham, who left his homeland not knowing where he was going, but trusting the call to step into the unknown. His willingness to embrace change transformed him into the father of nations, his legacy carried across centuries. If he had remained rooted in the familiar soil of his ancestors, his name might have been forgotten. Instead, by walking into uncertainty, he stepped into destiny. The greatness of his story lies not in what he left behind, but in what he gained by embracing change. The ancient Greeks celebrated Odysseus for the same reason. His journey home was not a straight line. It was a constant series of changes, trials and transformations. He faced storms, monsters, temptations, and endless detours. Each demanded adaptation, each demanded courage. His greatness did not come from resisting change, but from navigating it, embracing each trial as part of his path. In this way, the Odyssey itself became a metaphor for life. Greatness is not found in stillness but in motion, not in clinging to the shore but in sailing through the changing seas. Even civilizations that flourished did so by embracing change. The Athenians, after seeing their city destroyed, did not rebuild the old in the same way. They envisioned something greater, something new, and by doing so they created the Athens of philosophy, art, and democracy. Their greatness was not in their ability to preserve the past, but in their courage to step into a different future. The same can be said of the Phoenicians, whose greatness was not in land or armies, but in their willingness to sail into the unknown, to chart seas that others feared, to embrace the uncertainty of waters that had no map. Their adaptability and willingness to embrace change made them the connectors of the ancient world, spreading ideas, goods, and cultures far beyond their small homeland. On a personal level, this truth is just as powerful. Greatness never comes to those who remain in the safety of their comfort zones. The student who dares to learn a new skill, even when it is difficult, is embracing change and opening the door to growth. The person who chooses to leave behind old habits or toxic relationships is embracing change and stepping into a life of freedom. The leader who listens to new ideas, even when they challenge tradition, is embracing change and creating a path for innovation. Every story of personal greatness begins with the courage to say yes to the unknown. Think of the story of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who embraced change in its most profound form. In a society bound by tribal traditions, he carried a message that disrupted the old ways, calling people to justice, equality, and faith in one God. The resistance he faced was immense, yet his willingness to embrace and embody this transformative change reshaped not only his community, but the course of history. His story reminds us that true greatness often emerges not from maintaining the status quo, but from daring to step into the new and carrying others with you. Change also refines us in ways comfort never can. The sword becomes sharp only when it is forged in fire, hammered and shaped through heat and pressure. So too are human beings refined by change. It strips away what is weak, strengthens what is true, and prepares us for challenges we could never face otherwise. Those who run from change remain dull, untested, and fragile. Those who embrace it emerge sharper, stronger, and ready to leave their mark. Greatness is not given, it is forged in the fires of change. The natural world shows us this same lesson. The caterpillar must surrender its form, entering the darkness of the cocoon, before it can emerge as a butterfly. If it resisted that change, it would never take flight. The seed must break open, surrendering its shape, in order to become a tree. If it clung to its form, it would never grow. In the same way, we must be willing to embrace the transformations that life brings, trusting that in the breaking, in the shifting, in the changing lies the path to our greatest selves. This truth also reveals why those who cling to the past are often left behind. The pharaohs who resisted new ways lost their power. The Romans who clung to decaying traditions lost their empire. But those who embraced change, like the Athenians, the Phoenicians, the Israelites in their wilderness journey, discovered new strength and new beginnings. Greatness has always been found not in resistance, but in courage. Not in fear, but in faith that change carries us forward. In our own time, the principle is no different. The world moves quickly, technologies advance, opportunities appear and vanish, and challenges arise unexpectedly. Those who cling to the old ways alone will find themselves left behind. But those who adapt, who embrace change with open hands, will discover that every shift is a doorway to growth. To embrace change is to embrace possibility. It is to see every ending as the beginning of something new, every challenge as the seed of opportunity, every unknown as the ground where greatness can be built. When we look back at the flow of history, it becomes clear that greatness never came to those who resisted the river. It came to those who stepped into it, who allowed themselves to be carried into new places, who trusted that the current would lead them to something greater than what they left behind. Embracing change does not mean life will be easy. It means life will be full of growth, full of lessons, full of transformation. It is the path that leads from survival to strength, from strength to renewal, and from renewal to greatness itself. And when we embrace it fully, we discover that the path of change is not just the way forward. It is the very way to live a life that is worth remembering. because true greatness is always born from embracing change, and embracing change is what ultimately reshapes the world.